Welcome to our next series. It's entitled Inverted. We're going to look at how our perspective is inverted of God's perspective. And this inversion happens because of our sinful nature. Now, have you seen a picture that has been inverted, like a negative? You can tell what it is, but the colors are all off. And from the grand scheme of things, the picture is off, right? And so often that's the case with our perspective versus God's. Our logical, what we think is logical, or our expectations, they're not generally met potentially. We think that God could have done things differently. And we start asking ourselves questions like, why does God let bad things happen to good people? Which, is a fair question, but I think it's a very, flawed question. Because times I think, God would probably ask the question, why am I holding back all this, this wrath and allowing grace and mercy? And I think we don't necessarily get God's perspective of things, right? And so I would say not at all, right? And we're completely inverted through our human eyes, through our own logical and our own expectations. Today we're going to look at purpose or significance. This idea of what is my purpose? What is my significance? Do I matter? Would anyone notice if I was gone? Those are questions that I've heard, and I think they're logical and good questions to ask. However, we need to understand God's perspective in order for us to really understand how we can view our purpose, right? What God's purpose for us is. And that problem is that the problem comes in when we're measuring our purpose, we're using our own measuring stick, right? We're using our own standards, our own perspective of what my purpose is or my significance. And I think there's a major flaw in that because we are broken, we are human, we are flawed just by our nature. And I think it is even multiplied and amplified, if you will, because we watch these movies, we read these books, we see all these stories, and we see the main character, and we put ourselves in the shoes of the main character. And we think that we are the main character of our own life. We are the Batman. We are the Katniss Everdeen, right? And we should, the story of our life should revolve around us. And I think that's a problem. Because in all reality, I'm probably just even one of those extras in the Batman movies, or the person just in one of the districts in Hunger Games. That my significance, yes, it means something to me, but in the grand scheme of things, we need to have perspective of that, right? There's a baby in the Christmas story that this baby grows up to be a man that you would think by any means he was the main character of his story. Now, it's not Jesus, it's his cousin, John the Baptist. You realize that John the Baptist is the only person that can literally say that he was following Christ, that he knew that Christ was the Messiah in utero. He was in his mother's womb when Mary came and did some parkour jump leaps inside of her, that she knew that this was the Messiah. She knew that Mary was carrying the Messiah, and that her son, Elizabeth said that her son was the one to prepare the way. And I think that's just a tremendous view that, like, literally from birth, John knew who Jesus was and that he was the Messiah. So it's no surprise when Jesus shows up and he's to be baptized that John says, I'm not even worthy to tie your sandals. Like, no, I can't baptize you. Now let's picture John the Baptist for a second. Now he's walking around the desert. He's one of those recluse, middle of nowhere, away from people. He's wearing camel skin. He's has probably a beard, an unkept beard, if you will. And for food, all he has is locusts and honey. And that's what he ate. That's his diet. It's quite paleo or keto, if you will, right? But this diet of locusts and honey, and just living off the land. John the Baptist was that crazy cousin. We all know the crazy cousin, right? Like, if you don't have a crazy cousin, chances are you're the crazy cousin. So, like, we need to understand that John the Baptist was a little kooky. And he was telling people that, and he's baptizing them, and that's a common practice then. He was baptizing them in the Jewish faith, knowing that the Messiah was coming, knowing that Jesus was the Messiah. He baptized Jesus, sees the Holy Spirit, sees God, Son, that I'm truly he's God talking with Jesus, saying, I'm so proud of you, and being baptized. Like, that is a crazy moment in history that John the Baptist was sitting right there baptizing Jesus. And it's incredible that this person who was the kooky cousin, was a person that people were following, was a little bit a little odd. In any other story, he would have been the main character. But what is his response when disciples tell him, his own disciples who were following him, come to him and say, hey, there's someone across the water that is baptizing people as well. And it's Jesus, right? And said, what's the deal? Like, why is this happening? And John points his disciples to Jesus, and he says this awesome thing where he says, this is John 3, verse 30. It says, he must become greater, and I must become less. Other versions say, he must increase and I must decrease. And that's just such an incredible picture of what John viewed his life, his purpose as. His purpose was to prepare the way for Jesus Christ. His purpose was to point people to Jesus. He understood that purpose from birth, what he was sent there to do. And I think we need to understand this, is that it comes from an accurate picture of who Jesus is. That John the Baptist understood that Jesus was the Messiah. He understood that Jesus was to come and save the world. And he was just preparing the way. He was just there to point people to Jesus. And he says, the one who comes from above is above all. The one who is from the earth belongs to the earth and speaks as one from the earth. And the one who comes from heaven is above all. He testifies to what he has seen and heard, and no one accepts his testimony. He's talking about Jesus. He's understanding who Jesus is. And he's telling his disciples, this is the Messiah. He has the right perspective of what his purpose is. He doesn't see himself as the Batman or the Katniss. He sees himself as simply one to point to the main character, that is Jesus. Now, my challenge to you this week is to understand your purpose. How are you pointing people to Christ? Like, what part of John the Baptist's life are you going to really emulate? And I hope it's not eating worms or eating locusts and honey. I hope it's the pointing people to Christ, right? Because that was John the Baptist's purpose from the very beginning, when he leapt for joy in his mother's womb to the last day when he was beheaded for his faith in Jesus. So be like John the Baptist and point people to Christ this week. Thank you.